On May 11th, 2017, a paper titled The Conceptual Penis as a Social Construct was accepted by the journal known as Cogent Social Sciences. The paper argues that even though penises are a part of the male anatomy, they are best understood as a social construct that represents toxic masculinity. Or at least that's what I think it argues. The fact is, this paper is almost impossible to follow, and not just because it was about gender studies, but because the paper was a hoax and was intentionally written to not make any sense. In fact, the authors did a follow-up with Skeptic magazine and said this: "We didn't try to make the paper coherent, instead, we stuffed it full of jargon. After completing the paper, we read it carefully to ensure it didn't say anything meaningful, and as neither one of us could determine what it was actually about, we deemed it a success." The authors of this paper are James Lindsay and Peter Boghossian. You may remember Peter from my previous videos where I did a review of his book. I'll leave a link to that video in case anyone's interested. The reason for this hoax was to expose a big problem in academia. The root of the problem is that while science has a built-in corrective mechanism, that is to say that if a scientist gets something wrong, there will be others who test the claim and ultimately disprove the incorrect data. This obviously isn't a perfect system, but it's the best we've got. But this corrective mechanism doesn't really exist in the social sciences, and that's because there tends to be much less controlled tests due to the inability to perform social experiments in lab-like conditions. So due to this limitation, we have to be much more aware of our own biases when we do research, since we can't control for this very well. And I think this was the point of the hoax, to expose the bias of those in the field of gender studies, and to show that the whole field is driven not by facts, but by ideology. Will the hoax accomplish its goal? Well, probably not, for two reasons. The first is that those blinded by ideology won't be deterred by simple facts. After all, way too many people are convinced that the gender pay gap exists, despite there not really being any evidence, as I've talked about in a previous video. The other reason is that although there is much this paper says about gender studies, it doesn't necessarily prove that gender studies is a giant circle jerk. Even though the paper shouldn't have been published, many will point to the journal itself as the problem. In particular, the fact that Cogent Social Science is an open-source journal, which makes it pay to publish, but according to the article in Skeptic magazine, the authors didn't pay to have their paper published. And even though pay-to-publish journals can create a conflict of interest by putting profit above truth, the fact is that publications have to cover their costs, and the point of open-source journals is that the general public will be able to access the information without having to pay for it or have a subscription to the journal. But someone has to cover the costs, so sometimes this is paid by the author. And as long as there are controls in place to separate the peer review process from the financial process, it's entirely possible to avoid such conflicts of interest. Cogent claims to have a blind peer review process, which should be enough, but I certainly can't say for sure that it wasn't a problem. But if it's not the journal, then what exactly is wrong with gender studies? Well, the paper seems to expose some serious problems, namely that just by using certain words, experts in gender studies seem to be unable to tell the difference between real and fake works published on the subject. I find it highly unlikely that this would happen for more rigorous fields such as chemistry, physics, or even economics, or even political science. Although, I admit I may be wrong, especially with political science. With gravity, germ theory, and chemical reactions, all things which we don't know everything about, at least we can be fairly certain on the basics. However, with gender studies, this isn't the case. We don't have uncontroversial theories that are practically accepted by all experts and can be shown to be true with facts. So we should be far less confident on the subject matter, and yet rather than teaching more than one side or explaining the uncertainty due to the lack of ideal conditions for testing, we see gender studies often taught as certainty. And this isn't just my opinion on the matter. A quick Google search for Christina Hoff Sommers will bring up several websites where she's talking about the problem with feminism and gender studies in academia. I'll leave a link in the description to a USA Today article, but if you'd rather not read, you can also find her interview on the Rubin Report on YouTube, where she talks about some of these issues. So in the end, I don't know exactly where the problem lies, but I think it's fairly clear that there is a problem. In my opinion, I think the bulk of the problem rests with the field of gender studies, but that's just my opinion. But either way, I think we need to take a hard look at gender studies and maybe some of the other social sciences as well and see if the data actually fits what is being taught in universities. But we also need to assure that the peer-reviewed journals are upholding quality standards, or else not take them seriously. Alright, so now just to make this video a little more fun, let's read some of the Conceptual Penis as a social construct. The whole paper is 7 pages long, so I'll just pick out some of the more entertaining parts, but I'll also leave a link in the description in case anyone wants to take a look. The androcentric scientific and metascientific evidence that the penis is the male reproductive organ is considered overwhelmingly and largely uncontroversial. It is true that nearly all male-gendered persons who are also male at birth have a genital organ that, among other purposes, carries the duct for the transfer of sperm during copulation. This organ is usually identified as the penis, and for many males it serves as the role of their reproductive organ. There are, however, many examples of persons with penises who will not reproduce, including those who have sustained injury, are unable to coerce a mate, are uninterested in reproducing offspring, are medically infertile, or identify as asexual. While these examples may still constitute males, it is distinctly fallacious to identify their penises as reproductive organs. Therefore, there are many women who have penises. These are specifically pre-operative transgendered women and chromosomal males who choose to identify as women without indicating their desire to transition, and despite damaging cultural tropes against their womanhood and femininity, these constitute critical examples of a human demographic for whom their genital organs, while it may be utilized reproductive in some cases, it is not best understood as being a male genital organ. This paper is so hard to read because it's just intentional nonsense. The constructed intersection of the anatomical penis and the performative conceptual penis defines the problematic relationship masculinity presents for male bodies and their impact upon women in our pre-post patriarchal society. In addition to self-objectification, the conceptual penis can, intrinsically to the machismo-braggadocio isomorphic map, express itself as the subject of toxic masculinity. I have no idea what that possibly means. We see further linguistic evidence for this phenomenon as hypermasculine men often use the word dick, casual slang for penis, as an actionable verb. To dick someone might mean to take advantage of them or to have sex with them, depending on the constructual context of the application. This they also conflate with expressing power dynamics over other men, as exemplified in the phrase, "I dicked him over," which presents iconic male hegemonic thinking, per Duncanson. Alright, so this is where it gets really good. Nowhere are the consequences of hypermasculine machismo-braggadocio isomorphic identification with the conceptual penis more problematic than concerning the issues of climate change. Climate change is driven by nothing more than it is by certain damaging themes and hypermasculinity that can be best understood via the dominant, rapacious approach to climate change identifiable with the conceptual penis. Our planet is rapidly approaching the much warned about 2 degrees Celsius climate change threshold, and due to patriarchal power dynamics that maintain present capitalist structures, especially with regards to the fossil fuel industry, the connection between hypermasculinity, dominance of scientific, political, and economic discourses, and the irreparable damage to our economy is made clear. Yeah, that's right. Penises cause climate change. One practical recommendation that follows from this analysis is that climate change research would be better served by a change in how we engage in the discourse of politics and science, avoiding the hypermasculine, penis-centric take whenever possible. So in conclusion, we concluded that penises are not best understood as a male sexual organ or as a male reproductive organ, but instead as an intact social construct that is both damaging and problematic for society and future generations. The conceptual penis presents significant problems for gender identity and reproductive identity within social and family dynamics, is exclusionary to disenfranchised communities based upon gender or reproductive identity, is an enduring source of abuse for women and other gender marginalized groups and individuals, is the universal performative source of rape, and is the conceptual driver behind much of climate change. I find that so hilarious. Penises cause climate change. I never would have guessed. An explicit isomorphic relationship exists between the conceptual penis and the most problematic themes in toxic masculinity, and that relationship is mediated by the machismo-braggadocio aspects of male hypermasculinity, thought, and performance. A change in our discourse in science, technology, policy, economics, society, and various communities is needed to protect marginalized groups, promote the advancement of women, trans, and genderqueer individuals, including non-gendered and gender-skeptical people, and to remedy environmental impacts that follow from climate change driven by capitalist and neo-capitalist over-reliance on hypermasculine themes and exploitative utilization of fossil fuels. Anyways, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy my work, you can subscribe to my channel. If you like this video, you can give it a thumbs up, and you can comment, and you can also follow me on social media. The links are in the description. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.